On a cold Friday morning, an old mother stood outside the police station with shaking hands and a heart full of pain. She was not there to beg for money. She was not there to cause trouble. She had come for one simple thing: respect for her dead son. Even before she stepped inside, she could already feel how heavy the day was going to be. She held her old folder so tightly, as if it were the last piece of her son she had left in this world. Inside were papers, memories, and a martyr certificate she had protected for years. Every step toward that door felt harder than the last. She was afraid, but she kept walking. Some pain teaches people to stay silent, but a mother's love can still push her forward. Inside the station, the room felt busy, loud, and cold. People moved around without noticing the pain on her face. She stood at the front desk and tried to speak with respect. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but her purpose was strong. She only wanted someone to listen before judging her. Instead of kindness, she was met with impatience. The officer barely looked at her before pointing her away, like she did not matter. That small gesture hurt more than shouting would have. It told her, in one careless moment, that her pain was an inconvenience. Still, she stayed quiet, because grief had already taught her how to swallow humiliation. Scene 5. She sat down on a hard bench, surrounded by strangers but completely alone. Her back was bent, not just by age, but by years of carrying sorrow in silence. The folder rested in her lap, like a burden and a blessing at the same time. She stared down, collecting herself. Some wounds do not bleed in public, but they still ached just as deeply. Slowly, she opened the folder and looked through the papers again. She had checked them so many times that she knew every fold, every mark, every stain. These were not just documents to her. They were proof that her son had lived, served, and died with honor in a world that forgets quickly. Paper had become her only defense against being erased. Then she lifted the small framed image of her son. For a second, the police station disappeared, and all that remained was a mother and a memory. She remembered his smile, his duty, and the day he never came home. Her eyes filled, but she refused to break completely. She had cried enough tears in private. Today she had come to stand. After a moment, she rose again and walked back to the desk. This time she held the certificate more clearly, hoping someone would finally understand what it meant. She was not asking for special treatment. She was asking for dignity. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is return after being dismissed the first time. She spoke carefully, explaining why she had come and why those papers mattered. Her voice was respectful, almost apologetic, though she had done nothing wrong. You could hear the pain hiding beneath every word. She still believed that if she explained gently enough, maybe someone would show compassion. Hope, even when it is small, can keep a tired heart moving. But the answer that came back was sharp and cruel. The officer's tone cut through her like a blade. In that moment, her face changed completely. She was not just disappointed. She was wounded. It is one thing to lose someone you love, but it is another to watch people treat that sacrifice like it means nothing. A few people in the station turned to look. No one stepped forward. No one said a word. Public silence can be just as painful as public humiliation. She lowered her eyes, feeling the weight of every stare, and for a moment it seemed like the room had decided her pain was not worth protecting. She pressed a folder against her chest, almost like she was shielding her son from insult. Her lips trembled, but she stayed composed. There was still pride in her, even in her pain. That is a strange strength of mothers like her. They could be wounded deeply and still refuse to let dignity die. With slow hands, she pulled out the martyr certificate. It was more than proof. It was a final recognition of a life given in service. She held it with both hands, not because it was fragile, but because it was sacred to her. In that paper lived memory, sacrifice, and the value a son the world seemed too busy to remember. She held the certificate forward and tried one more time. Her eyes pleaded before her words even finished. She wanted them to see beyond her old clothes and tired face. She wanted them to understand that behind this grieving mother stood the memory of a man who had given everything. But respect cannot be forced into a heart that has already become careless. Again, she was ignored. The certificate lowered in her hands, and a tear slipped down her cheek. It was not just sadness anymore. It was the pain of watching your loved one's honor treated like dust. In that moment, she looked less like a complainant and more like the living evidence of a broken society. She slowly gathered the papers back into the folder. There was a quiet finality in her hands, like someone folding away hope. Her head bowed, and she turned as if she had accepted that nobody here would care. Sometimes people do not collapse with noise. Sometimes they break in total silence. Hen, just as she was about to leave, she heard movement behind her. Something in the room changed. The usual careless noise seemed to pause for a second. She stopped and turned her head, unsure whether to expect more trouble or something else. Hope returned in the smallest sound. At the doorway stood a colonel. His presence was calm, but it carried weight. He did not rush. He did not speak immediately. And somehow, in that stillness, the whole room felt different. The mother looked up at him, confused and cautious, not knowing yet that the next few moments would change everything. She studied his face, searching for the same indifference she had already seen in others. But there was something else there. Attention, seriousness, respect. It was so unfamiliar in that moment that she almost did not trust it. When you have been humiliated, even kindness can feel unbelievable at first. The colonel stepped closer and asked to see her papers. She handed them over with both hands, careful and nervous. Her heart must have been racing. She had already been dismissed once, and pain makes people afraid to hope again. Still, something about him made her wait. He read the certificate slowly. He did not glance at it and toss it aside. He read every part as if it mattered. And for the first time that day, this old mother was being seen. Sometimes healing begins in a very simple act. Someone finally taking your truth seriously. Then the colonel straightened, looked at the certificate, and saluted. The mother froze. She could not believe what she was seeing. In front of the same room that had humiliated her, someone had finally honored her son. That salute did not erase her grief, but restored something precious. Dignity. Tears came freely now, not only from pain, but from relief. It was as if years of silence cracked open in one moment of respect. She had not come asking for applause. She had only wanted her son's sacrifice to be acknowledged. And now, at last, someone worthy had done exactly that. The colonel asked her to sit, and this time she was not treated like a burden. He sat beside her and listened, really listened. Her posture was still fragile, but the fear in her face had softened. There is something deeply powerful about being heard after the world has ignored you for too long. She began telling her story, about her son, about what he meant to her, about the struggle she had faced after his death. Her voice was heavy, but steady. This scene matters because it shows us that every silent person carries a history we may know nothing about. As she spoke, the weight of her years became visible. This was not just one bad day. This was a lifetime of surviving loss, loneliness, and disrespect. Her pain had been building quietly for years. And now, at last, someone in authority was willing to hear it without interruption or contempt. The colonel answered her with kindness and seriousness. No false promises, no empty words, just simple respect. And that changed everything in her expression. You could see it in her eyes, the feeling that maybe her son had not been forgotten after all. Sometimes one decent person can repair damage that many others caused. He returned her documents carefully, almost ceremonially. That small gesture had meaning. He was not handing back paper. He was handing back honor. The mother received them with both hands, as if she was receiving justice itself. It was a quiet moment, but emotionally enormous. Nearby officers could no longer pretend nothing had happened. Their eyes dropped. Their posture changed. Shame moved through the room. The woman who had been treated like she did not matter was now standing in undeniable dignity. This scene reminds us that truth has a strange power. Once it is recognized, it exposes everyone who ignored it. She held the certificate against her chest once more, but now her back was straighter. The grief was still there. That would never disappear. But humiliation was no longer sitting on top of it. Respect had made room for breath again. And sometimes that is enough to help someone keep going. The colonel turned to the others and began giving firm instructions. We do not need loud anger to understand what was happening. Accountability had entered the room. The mother watched quietly, almost surprised that someone was finally defending what should never have needed defending in the first place. Someone brought her a chair, perhaps water, perhaps help. These were simple things, but after humiliation, simple kindness feels enormous. Her face softened with disbelief. She was not used to being cared for in that space. It shows how badly neglect can wound a person and how small acts of decency can begin to heal them. Now seated calmly, she looked different from the woman who first walked in. Still old, still grieving, still carrying pain, but no longer invisible. That is the emotional purpose of this moment. To show that dignity does not remove suffering, but it changes how a person carries it. She looked down at her son's photograph and allowed herself the smallest, saddest smile. It was a smile of a mother who still misses a child every day, but who finally feels that his name has been treated with honor. Grief and peace can exist together. Sometimes they sit in the same heart at the same time. When she stood to leave, she was not the same woman who had entered. Her hand still held the same folder. Her son was still gone, but something inside her had shifted. She had walked in carrying humiliation, and now she was walking out carrying restored dignity. At the entrance, she paused and looked back. It was not a dramatic moment, just quiet gratitude. Maybe she was thanking the colonel. Maybe she was thanking fate for not letting her leave completely broken. Either way, the scene tells us that compassion is never small to the person who desperately needed it. Outside, the light felt different. The world had not become perfect. Her sorrow had not ended, but her steps were steadier now. That is how healing often looks in real life. Not loud, not instant, just one person walking a little straighter after being treated with humanity. She stopped for a moment and looked upward, as if speaking silently to her son. Maybe she was telling him that someone remembered. Maybe she was saying that his sacrifice still had meaning. There was sadness in her face, but also peace. Some conversations happen without words. Standing there with a certificate in both hands, she looked small in body, but immense in spirit. This was no longer the image of a humiliated old woman. This was the image of a mother whose love had survived insult, silence, and time. Honor had been restored, and with it, a part of her heart. Scene 40. Voiceover. And that is the lesson of this story. Never mock the quiet pain of someone you do not understand. The person standing in worn clothes may be carrying a sacrifice greater than you could imagine. Respect costs nothing, but for someone wounded, it can mean everything. Sometimes one moment of dignity can heal what years of humiliation could not.